Welcome to Mobility Talks number 15. My grandfather used to ask me when I was little, how long is a piece of string? And it's a question that continues to stick with me to this day. It's one of those existential questions, a little bit like the one we are addressing today. How far is local? Now, if you're in Ireland and you ask someone, how far is it to the nearest pub? The answer you'll get is, it depends on how thirsty you are. And that's the thing. Everything is relative. So how far is local for you? Is it a matter of time or distance? Is it 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 1 hour away? Is it rather a walking distance, a cycling distance, or a short ride on public transport? Let us know. You can join the Slido tab to the right of your screen, and throughout the event, please do get involved, send us your comments and raise questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to raise them with our speakers. Public space, especially in cities, is at the crossroads of many competing policies, not least the fact that it is dealing with infrastructure, which is not something you can easily move about, replace, or change. Urban mobility plays an important role in freeing up or taking up space for other uses in the city. But urban mobility can also be perceived as a way of experiencing public space, as it's also part of the fabric of a city's culture or history. So to discuss how to go about reorganizing, redesigning, rethinking public space, we'll be kicking off with a presentation by Benjamin Büttner, head of the research group on accessibility planning at the Technical University of Munich. He'll be giving us some insights on an upcoming study looking at the concept of the 15-minute city. And after that, we'll be joined by two other guests who I will be presenting later on for a panel discussion where we will be looking at operational ways of rethinking public space. So, Benjamin, welcome to the Mobility Talks.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul, for the very nice introduction. Thank you all in the audience. Pleasure being here, and very much looking forward for also the panel discussion together with Sylvia and Sam. So can we start my slides? Perfect. Thank you very much. So how far is local? That's something that we at the Technical University, where I'm heading a research group on accessibility planning, are often philosophizing about. As you might know, there are some new concepts that are popping up. One of them is the 15-minute city. And that's something that I would like to introduce you here. And I should also say that EIT Urban Mobility is at the moment funding one of our thought leadership studies on the plus-minus 15-minute city. So there's a little bit of background on this. So you all have seen this. This is a picture from Madrid in 2019, right before COVID hit. And you can see very busy streets, not just for cars, but also for pedestrians, as you can see here in Madrid. But you can also see the scarcity of space. And that's one of the resources that we really have to work with as urban and transport planners. Then this happened, and we're all aware of this. All of a sudden, the COVID-19 pandemic started. People were really puzzled about how infectious it might be. People were trapped in their homes. Lockdown happened, and but you could really imagine then how much space, and you could really see in this picture how much space we are allocating to traffic, and mostly to cars. And I think this little man here visualizes very well. I guess he's not little, but he looks very little on these huge streets. So I think that's a very powerful picture. However, after a while, you could realize that people did not want to be trapped in their apartments anymore, because the space where people meet and socialize is key for our human nature, and that's why people came out and used those empty streets for socializing, for meeting, friends, even strangers. And this was something that nice to see, that we could allocate the space also for different purposes, not just for moving from one place to another. So COVID really made us rethink our streets, and active mobility was one of the main modes that all of a sudden happened. Not like cars before or buses, but going by bike or by bicycle or walking. But you can see here as well the 15-minute city, which is a powerful new concept, gained momentum all over the world. One of the front runners was Paris, and Carlos Moreno was also pushing this concept. And he has very ambitious goals. So one of the goals are to make the streets in Paris cycle-friendly by 2024. All of them, which is very ambitious. But what might even be more ambitious, removing 50% of on-street parking. And then using this for different purposes, for new purposes, such as socializing, meeting. Also, transforming schoolyards to public spaces. This is something where lots of focus was put on and still is. So when we talk about the 15-minute city, Carlos Moreno defines it as follows: an urban setup where locals are able to access all of their basic essentials at distances that would not take them more than 15 minutes by foot or by bicycle. So again, you can see here, active modes are really in the main focus of this concept. It's very important that that people can access essential urban social functions such as living, working, commerce, healthcare, education, and also entertainment, leisure activities, and all of this within 15 minutes. So the idea of the 15-minute city had plenty of benefits here. We can reduce travel, so it's not important to be as fast at one place and really use huge distances. So everything should be close. Proximity was a new concept that was more or less focused on. We will find more opportunities where we can meet, where we can socialize, where we can also do exercises. Obviously, this will then also turn into a promotion of sustainable mobility, such as walking and cycling. Walking and cycling doesn't have any pollution, no noises. So we will also benefit from this. We will increase our public spaces, green spaces. We will create new functions in our streets. And by this, at the end, we will also have a positive economic outcome. Because when people are on the street, they like to go out for a drink, meet people, get a coffee. And but is the 15-minute city really a new concept? And you can see here a little sketch from 1920. And this is how we planned also our villages, our little community centers. In the middle, normally a marketplace and maybe a church in Europe. And you can see that they already bundled these functions, and they also did not focus on cars for the streets, but on horses, on walking. So you could already see that density and the proximity of different activities was something that was very often focused on. Unfortunately, then the paradigm shifted to creating our cities for cars. But now we come back to this more human-centered planning paradigm, which is a very good thing. But actually, why are we talking about 15 minutes? So it sounds catchy, might be a good thing to market, but why are we not talking about a 20-minute neighborhood as they do in Australia, or maybe just 5 minutes? Maybe we should switch to X minutes. So let's just use Google and see what we could really do within 15 minutes. So what comes to my mind? Maybe not shopping, maybe not going to your job or going to meet friends, but we can paint a flower, write a poem, take a power nap. So this is what Google suggests us to do. Maybe paint a flower. So you can see here, This is the city flower, and you can see in the middle, there's always your home. So this is your origin, where you start exploring within 15 minutes, but maybe also within 20 or 30 minutes. So there are different thresholds. And then you can see for different functions, and can see some are more about leisure activities, some are on education. So you can break it down and then arrange your specific individual activities within this flower. And this flower might look different from person to person. So we have individual needs, not everyone is the same. Also, not everyone has the same capabilities. And also, this looks different for different urban spaces. So if you talk about the rural places, suburban places, or the urban core, this flower looks very different. So that's the spatial context that I'm talking about. So as you can see here, the city environment and then a more rural environment. And also we have to acknowledge this, that the 15-minute city is not the same everywhere. And it's also not the same for different individuals. So we have different capabilities, and this will also define our own catchment. So we have to acknowledge this. And 15% of the global population has a disability, so we really have to plan for them as well. And some people are not able to walk or cycle like we do, and this should be also acknowledged. Older people have an average speed of 3 kilometers per hour. With adults, we talk about 5 kilometers per hour. So that also means within 15 minutes, an average adult can go a little less than 1 kilometer with normal walking speed, while elderly people can only go until up to 700 meters. So this is already shrinking our catchment. So we have to acknowledge this. So these are the questions. I think we should be aware that we include also vulnerable groups in the planning of a plus minus 50-minute city. And we should also acknowledge who can walk and cycle, and also for how long. So there was this Furnish project, also from EIT Urban Mobility, where they stressed the need of creating benches where people can rest. I think this is something that is also very important. Also, the amenities are important, so we should acknowledge that not a shop is the same in a rural place compared to an urban place. What kind of goods do they carry, and these kind of things, and who do they serve? So what is the population around? So with all that in mind, but how can we then really achieve a transition towards sustainable and livable cities? First, we should define our own X-minute city. The flower could be a starting point. We're doing this now in Munich for the city of Munich, but also for the municipalities around Munich, so for more rural places and suburban places, and then see about the differences. We have to see what they need, and then we have to develop tools. We are about to develop a 15-minute score, and then assess how different neighborhoods are lacking different amenities. And what is crucial here, that we also include people. So citizen engagement is something that is really, really important. And how can we do this? All over the world, also during COVID, we've seen how people are all of a sudden taking the space, and bottom-up initiatives happened all over the world. So we talk about tactical urbanism and city street experiments, where people try something for a limited time and see how this might improve or even worsen the situation. So both is possible, as they are experiments. So there are different types of experiments. Just giving you some examples. One a very popular example were the pop-up bike lanes that also happened during COVID, and where more space of the roads was allocated to bicycles. And this was meant to be a temporary measure, but many of them became permanent and then improved the cycling network and also the active mobility of its cities. Another one is the repurposing of parking, and you can see here some examples from Munich and its surroundings. Very common thing is that bars or restaurants are using this in order to serve more customers, removing the parking spots in front of the bars or restaurants. But there are also non-commercial uses, like the ones that you can see on the left and right, where different public spaces were created in order to socialize without any need of eating or drinking or buying stuff. Very famous example that happened in 2007 was that the Times Square in New York, which was always a very busy place, also a bit cut off by all the cabs and buses. They said, okay, let's create a public space here in the heart of New York or Manhattan. Let's just paint the street red so that people see that something happens. Bring some street furniture, put this on this red former street. And people used it, liked it, and this was the experiment that happened in 2009. And then now 2013, until this day, you can see how this transformed to a public space where you even have a stage where you can have a nice view over Times Square. So these experiments can do a change. This is something that happens at a low risk and low cost as well. So politicians can say, yeah, let's try something. If it is good, we can make it more permanent. If it turns out to have negative effects, then we might have to go back. So something like this is a low risk and often a high reward initiative. And this also improves accessibility by active modes, creates more livable public spaces, and also fosters social cohesion. And this, with this, I come to the end of my presentation. So some takeaways of this X-minute city concept. It is not as it used to be. So back in the days, speed was king. So the faster we could go, the more distances we could cover. This is not the priority anymore, or it should not be the priority anymore. We have to slow down traffic, make it more human, create proximity of different amenities, activities, and by this foster active mobility. So active mobility needs to have the priority over motorized transport, especially private cars. Also, technology is nice and helps us in many regards, and I'm sure that Sam will also show us great examples here. Nevertheless, we need to listen to the citizens. So participation is key here in order to understand which measures might suit their needs and also the needs of vulnerable people. So how far is local? This always depends. So at the end, we have to consider different ages and different capabilities of our citizens. And with that, thank you very much. And I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, for taking us through this 15-minute city concept, but also not necessarily limiting it to 15 minutes. But what you are talking about is the need to transform cities. And when you speak about the communities as they were organized sort of back in the day, let's say, I suppose the big change that's happened is also this demographic boom that's exploded, particularly in cities that have attracted a lot more people. So how do you go about accommodating for the needs of these huge demographics while keeping public space more humane, more livable, not necessarily only focused on speed? So let's see how we can do this. And I'd like to invite our two other guests. So we have Silvia Casoran. She is Deputy Chief Architect at the Barcelona City Council. Welcome, Silvia.
Good afternoon.
And good afternoon. And we have Samuel Alvarado, founder and CEO of Model Me 3D. Welcome, Samuel.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So I would like to ask you, well, first of all, to react to Benjamin's presentation. But maybe we could just put up the results of the poll to see how far is local for our audience today. what we see is that they're saying, number one, that it is up to 15 minutes away. Second is up to 30 minutes away. So it is a question of time. So local is linked to time. How long does it take to get somewhere? But then, the active mobility options, cycling and walking, come very close behind. So Sylvia, you've been working on, urban mobility issues. Now you're deputy chief architect, so looking at the city in a much broader level. How do you see this transformation of the city, and what's your reaction to Benjamin's presentation?
Well, I love the concept of 15-minute city, but I wonder myself where this concept was during last century, because it's the time, not the only period of time in the story of our cities, the history of our cities, that we lost the right vision of creating human-scale cities. Because when we look at the Greek cities and the Roman cities, at the medieval cities, what we see is that all these cities were walkable distances, and only during last century, because of the great invention of the car, we started losing this 15 minutes concept. So yeah, my main worry is why did we lose this concept the last century?
Yeah, and we'll be seeing the impact of the car and how complex it may be to get away from the car and to move to other types of uses. Samuel, your reaction to Benjamin's presentation?
Well, first of all, great presentation about the 15-minute city. I think that the pandemic just accelerated the need for this quality to increase the quality of life of the citizens. And I think everything revolves around what the citizens want. So I think the question should be, what questions should we ask the citizens when it comes to the redesign of public spaces, whether it's temporary streets or permanent streets? That's where I think digital tools can play a huge part. So before the implementation of this kind of transition experiments or permanent streets, we should ask the citizens, what is it that they want? And digital tools will play a huge, important part of this in order to minimize time, but also cost, and allow everybody to have a democratic participation during the process.
And Sylvia, in Barcelona, can you give us a sense of how you go about transforming space? Because obviously you will be, I'm sure, needing to overcome many challenges, probably also in terms of governance. You might have different departments within Barcelona City Council that have very different ideas about how to use a public space. So how do you go about implementing change?
Well, it's a hard issue because, of course, getting rid of cars is always difficult. But especially in Barcelona and cities also like Paris, that we've got such a high density. This is really great for the goal of the 15-minute city, because we consider we are already a 15-minute city, because we've got local schools, high schools, health services, libraries, even shopping malls, in the scale of 15 minutes walking or cycling, because with cycling, the 15 minutes go to 4 kilometers. Barcelona is a scale of 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. So it's a really small city. So we consider we are already a 15-minute city, but because of this high density, it's also very difficult to gain more space for pedestrians. But in Barcelona, we are mainly walking. So it's really unfair not giving more and more space to the pedestrians. For commuting reasons, we are more than 60% of people are walking. So we need to give much more space for all these people that are doing, as you said, the active mobility, as Benjamin said. Walking and cycling are really not creating any bad impact on the health and on the environment. So they're really both healthy for our citizens. So we need to provide this space. And the only way is getting rid of the space that we gave during last century to the cars. So of course, it's always difficult to get rid of parking places. It's always difficult to get rid of car capacity, because as you mentioned, there are different interests, also in the different departments, and also in the politics, in the city. So yeah, it's quite hard, because in the end, it's fighting for each centimeter that we gain for the people. But when we see the result, and when the people really can feel how is it to walk in this new space, and how does it feel also to cycle in these traffic calm areas, then people are reclaiming for more and more of these interventions. And what we are really trying to do is putting the people, especially the children, in the center of the decision making. So that's the key, and it's working quite good, but it's still hard.
And putting the people at the center would also probably mean that we'll need to get them involved somehow in the decision making as well, especially when you're on a neighborhood level or a very, very local scale, I imagine. Samuel, can you also give us a sense of how you're looking at it from your perspective, how you're supporting decision making in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Sylvia with everything she said. I think parking spaces are the main issue at hand. 90% of the time, cars are not being used and just taking up space. And during the pandemic, we got to see that these spaces could have been used more creatively for playgrounds, for spaces where people could spend more time. Unfortunately, now that everything came back to normal, things are just not really changing at the pace that we wish they would. So I think that there should be a democratic public consultation to every street on a granular level, asking them, would you like to get this parkings removed, and allow them to actually design or co-design the spaces. So in our case, our co-design tool helps with that process by doing a demographic survey of what kind of citizens live in that area, but at the same time, getting to know what kind of redesign would they like in those spaces. And yeah, as you can see on this video, this is demonstration of the proof of concept that we did in the city of Amsterdam. That's what we were basically asking the citizens to do, actually drag and drop objects of the kind of square that you would like in that specific area, and then submit those designs and actually adding a comment of what do you think about it? Are you okay with redesigning the public space where you live or not? Those are the things that the cities, in order to make more informed decisions, they should collect this kind of information. So before implementing something, they make sure, okay, based on a democratic process, this is what the people want. And so far, there's nothing that is offering this kind of, let's say, a solution to the problem that we're addressing.
Okay, that's an interesting tool, and maybe it can support decision making, getting citizens more involved. Benjamin, in your study, can you also give us a sense maybe on some of the challenges that cities are facing in terms of governance? A little bit like what Sylvia was saying, let's say the conflicts or the different views between departments. Is that something that you've assessed and analyzed?
Yeah, I think that's crucial. Thanks for pointing this out or raising this point. Even within cities, I think the communication is not always ideal. Let's put it like this. We developed accessibility tools in order to break silos between urban planners and transport planners. So that's already a huge problem, that people or transport planners are still keen of maybe building new roads, transport engineers, while urban planners and urbanists maybe are more focusing on public spaces, creating public realm. So, and this often doesn't go along. And then the accessibility planning is a great concept to bring those dimensions together. So the idea is always, how can I get to one place? And ideally, this is then on a neighborhood level. So we really have to think about walking and cycling. But then also on another level, when we not only talk about the city, but also about the different stakeholders that are shaping our mobility behavior. We have players like BMW in Munich that we also have to take on board with our concepts. And so we have the public transport agencies, and all of them have to sit together and develop a common vision of the city. And I think that's key, and those digital tools can also help here in order to facilitate the dialogue. And I think that's often not yet happening, unfortunately. But I think here technology and can really help in order to facilitate the dialogue.
What's interesting, though, with public space is that the digital tools can facilitate the dialogue, maybe make the real life changes a little bit more pleasant or accepted in advance, but at the same time, you do at one point need to intervene. And I wonder, maybe Sylvia first, is the strategy to intervene more about, well, we just go in a little bit more sort of, brutal, let's say, or is it better to take a strategy that's more around, temporary experiments here and there and just see how these temporary experiments evolve over time? What is the best approach?
I guess we need to combine both because people need to experience. This is something that Benjamin said, no? The experience of people, what public space is really important to let them understand how the public space could change, because it's really difficult to imagine, no, how a big road, a main road, or a 50 meters wide avenue like we have in Barcelona that had 12 car lanes until last century, how this could change, no? Now, people, when the change is there, then they realize that this is possible. But before the change is not there, it's too difficult. So, of course, the resistance to the change, because in the end, we need the individual change of every person, no? Because we are asking them to change their mobility patterns, and we are asking them to change the social use of public space, because we want them to use the streets, no, that we get for them. So, I mean, we need to combine both, because, for instance, we were talking about superblocks for a few years before we got the first superblock. And the first superblock, it was just like all of a sudden, because it was a university experiment together with the city. And then we had the tactical intervention. Just in one weekend, the changes were made. That was 6 years ago, exactly now, the Poblenou superblock. And then when the public space was available, that's the point when the people started to understand what they could do with this public space. Before, it was really difficult to imagine how the change could be. So after this superblock, the second superblock was much nicer, much easier. And then now the participatory budgets, many neighborhoods are asking for superblocks. And of course, this project is scaling up to the whole city. But we started with one change of just one weekend, really fast change, in order to make it visible, what we could do with all this new public space. So I think we need to combine both. And tactical, for instance, for me, it doesn't have to mean temporary always. Because if we need this big change in the cities, we need this change now, because all these problems of course, we know, in Europe this summer it's been quite hard, and this is probably the best summer for the rest of our lives. So we need to create the big impact now, and we don't have the money and the time to change it if we really want to change the whole city brick by brick. So we need to combine both, and we need to go fast.
Yeah, and in a previous episode on the mobility talks, we were talking about public realm, which is very, very close to the topic that we're looking at today. There was a comment by Luca Bertolini from the University of Amsterdam, which I'd like us to hear now.
We need to experiment, because there is a lot we do not know. Changing the arrangement of a street in the direction that this image suggests is not just changing the streets. It requires changing the way we organize our lives, the way we organize our businesses.
And I think it's interesting because he introduces the notion that it's not actually just about citizens in that sense. It's also about, the businesses. We can think about city logistics. We can think about restaurants, all sorts of local actors that will somehow also be affected, will need to change the way they operate. Samuel, in your digital tool, how do you see the confrontation between all of these views? Does it happen well?
That's a great question. I think that there's always going to be conflict in any case. We just want to accelerate the process by providing a tool that allows everyone to have a say. I think that that's where the key relies, that every stakeholder, whether it's a business, a citizen, government, any kind of entity or individual, can have a saying during the process. And we don't want to block the process that already exists. We're just facilitating it. Because we need the experts, we need the urban planners, we need all the parties to be involved. It's more on how can they all participate within the same centralized tool and allow the data analytics to make allow them to make more informed decisions.
And also in a previous episode on the public realm, we had Andreas Roll also saying something interesting, which I'd like us to hear now.
We can make the travel time feel shorter if we design public realm cities that are attractive to move in. And that is very much about giving our eyes something to look at.
So giving our eyes something to look at. And I'd like to go back to Benjamin on this one, because I think there's also something interesting when thinking about developing cities to make them more attractive. You can actually make the travel time feel a lot shorter, because it's actually quite interesting to move around such a city. How do you take on board that notion in your reflections around the 15-minute city?
I mean, very crucial point. It's also about perceived accessibility and how you feel. If you feel comfortable walking along a street, or if you feel maybe even scared. And at the end, this perceived accessibility will dictate where you're going. And I think that's something where we are often mistaken as transport modelers, because we always take the shortest route, the one that is the fastest. But maybe people don't want to go that way because they don't feel comfortable, because they are scared. There might be lots of pollution, lots of noise. Maybe they during night this might also change. And as you said, your comfort level will also dictate how long it feels. So I think that's very interesting to see. And also it changes from mode to mode. So if you jump on the public transport or in the metro, you have a very exact idea of how long you're on the metro. It's very different when you cycle or walk, because then you can enjoy yourself and time flies. This is something that is also interesting. So the 15-minute city, to answer your question, should acknowledge this and make also neighborhoods that are pleasant to be in and to walk and to cycle.
Sylvia, also there may be a reaction on that, because that's where really urban planning and urban mobility, I think, really go very much hand in hand.
Yeah, well, in Barcelona, sometimes we are discussing the centimeters, of the car lanes, the bus lane, the bike lane, and how much space for each of them. Usually, the last one is like the bike, because it's the one that arrived the latest, which is not true because they existed before cars, of course. But it's like, well, let's make some small space for the bike, but this is the opposite. I mean, we should really get rid of more and more car lanes. We are doing this, but then we are going step by step. Yeah, of course, the discussions are there. And our big challenge from Barcelona is also to create much more green spaces, because we've got a big lack of green areas because of our density. So we also need a space for green. And the space for the sidewalks, for instance, in Barcelona, we've got many motorbikes that are still parked there, and the terraces and all the obstacles, all the possible obstacles are on the sidewalks, not on the asphalt for cars. No? So we also need to get rid of these obstacles in order to create these accessible places, because we have to think of everyone, no? Also on wheelchairs, also on babies, and everyone needs to feel safe at the public space and comfortable. So with shadows and with white places. Yeah. And of course, it's always difficult to get rid of centimeters for the traffic. Yes, I agree.
And Samuel, I mean, these changes, when they're based on consultation, citizen engagement, digital tools that have helped to visualize and shape what we're looking at, do you also feel that there are some methodological aspects to working with digital tools that are also able to increase public uptake of these transformations in the end? And what kind of work are you doing on methodology? Because I think that's always something that is very complex when you come to citizen engagement, is the kind of methodology you have in place to ensure that you've come up with something that is not biased, that is inclusive of all different communities and aspects. How do digital tools help in that, and how do you work on these tools to improve the methodology?
Yeah, it's a great question. The way I see it is that it's like gaming. I see it that it should be inclusive, that it's user-friendly, that anybody can use, even a 5-year-old. I think the user-friendliness and the engagement are two aspects that are very important in order for the end user, which is the citizens ultimately, be able to use it and also want to understand and visualize and immerse themselves on the area that they want to redesign. So I think that gaming should play a very important aspect on this whole thing in order to connect with them. I think that the connectivity, and especially new generations, are really engaging with that. And when it comes to the older generations as well, there can be like workshops where we teach them also how to do this, because I think that that's where everybody connects. I think I'm a gamer myself, so I understand that, like with playing online and being able to communicate and feel that you actually participated in something. It gives like it empowers the people, and I think that that's where our tool can play a big part. Finding ways how we can engage with the stakeholders, but also with the citizens themselves.
Yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to add that this point of empowering people in the end is really, really important for the cities, because when people are claiming for the streets, for the use for safe streets for the kids, for instance, politicians really must react. And this is what's happening, for instance, in our city with the scholar rebellion, where many schools are reclaiming for safe environments, for both safety reasons, but also for the environmental reasons, for the health. And really, the politicians need to react, and they do react. So that's really important to empower the people, as Samuel was saying.
And would you have examples? So I think it's also interesting to look at when there's a very strong public reaction against such a change in a street, in a neighborhood. Are there any examples of that, and how did you respond to this kind of public backlash, let's say? I'm sure it's happened. Either Benjamin or Sylvia, maybe, if you have any experience on that.
Yes, of course. Can I start, Benjamin? No, I was thinking of the place where I lived my last 10 years, where the superblock in Poblenou is located. 6 years ago, when the superblock started, it was really, really a big issue. This is just 3 streets by 3, 3 blocks by 3 blocks. So a quite small piece of land, 400 meters by 400 meters. Only 2,000 people living there. So really low dense area, for Barcelona, because it's an industrial area and it's under transformation and so on, and just a few activities. So there was really nothing happening there. Then the superblock came, and then some people were claiming the right to drive straight in all the streets of the city. This kind of fundamental rights, or the right to park for free, because in this area the parking was for free until that moment, and then we had to pay like €1 per week, 20 cents per day, for these 10 square meters that a car is occupying. So this is nothing, but still people were complaining. So this is like, well, are these fundamental rights? Should we really pay attention to these people? But then you've got the media, and then you've got the opposition, in the politics, and they really take advantage of this, and they really make a big mess of nothing. But that's really hard for the politicians in government, because they really need to resist, and they really need to understand that this is just the evolution of the change, and this is the resistance to the change. And of course, the no is really creating a big issue, but the yes, no one is attending to the yes. So yeah, we kept on doing this, and we realized after a while, but then it was really hard the first months to resist for the politicians, because it was, if you check internet, Superblock Poblenou, Superilla Poblenou from 2016, you will see. I mean, there was the changes were really small, and it was really not affecting really. I mean, everyone could access to their place by car. Everyone could take the public transit. Everyone could move. The accessibility was for everyone, but there were different rules. That was the point, and that was like, yeah, really crazy. So it's hard for the politicians, I guess, this kind of change.
Yeah, and this is something that one has to take into account, especially when looking at it from an urban mobility operator perspective. You may not always be like you're in the seat of the actual politician taking that decision, and it's important to have that dialogue open. Benjamin, any additional elements to add on, where there's been public backlash?
Yeah, I mean, we experienced similar as Silvia just very visually explained. In Munich, for instance, we were copying the summer streets. That also happened a lot in Scandinavia beforehand. So the idea here is closing streets for cars, or we should better say opening them for pedestrians, also for cyclists, also just for a limited time over the summer. So one issue here in Munich, some worked out really well, where we had busy streets where people and kids played on the streets, where different events happened. And then there were streets where nothing happened. So it was just blocked. All parking cars had to be removed, and resistance happened in the neighborhood, in the streets where the cars had to be removed. And the resistance came from the neighbors, from the people living in that street. And the main issue here, and our lesson was that we really have to take them on board. We really have to talk to them beforehand and make them an active player, and ask them how would they like to have their street in the future, and what could we do there, what would really work for them. And also, if we want to do this permanently, and I also agree with Silvia here, it's not just about temporary change. At the end, we should strive for a permanent change. We have to give them alternatives for their private car usage. And this can be done by giving them initiatives to change their mobility behavior, like using sharing options, bike sharing, car sharing, maybe e-scooters. So mobility hubs become also an interesting aspect here.
So car ownership has been very much linked to a sense of individual freedom and even ascending socially, a sort of a sign of social status as well. So there are some pretty important symbols linked to car ownership, and I would imagine that in this process of transformation, it's not just a question of what is the alternative urban mobility solution. It's also, what is the project that you're carrying, and how will this other project empower me just as much as the car has empowered me so far? Samuel, again, I mean, I'm coming back to the kind of tools that you're developing. Beyond the urban mobility aspect, how can you also help people somehow imagine life without a car in another project? Because it is actually more than just an alternative. It's another world that you're building here.
Yeah, it's we provide digital twins of cities, so that's the first starting point, being able to relate yourself to that area specifically that's going to be redesigned. That's one of the points that we focus a lot on. But then also, what kind of scenarios? We need to provide different scenarios to them, like which kind of scenarios would they like, they would prefer to have. And that's crucial in order for them to have different choices, not just one choice, but how should this space be redesigned? Because at the end, what we want is to collect as many votes as possible, because the more they vote, the more we can make a more informed decision, and based on that, have a percentage of, based on the votes, what was the most preferred redesign or implementation, or maybe not. Maybe they said we don't want any redesign. Maybe the majority said we don't want our street redesigned, and that's fine also. But then at least you got to ask them, and then you can. Then there's a democratic process within it. So that's always the crucial part. Like, how can they visualize this? And that's why I think digital twins and 3D models can actually allow you to understand what's going to happen in those in your own street. Because I think that you, more than anyone, the one who lives in those streets, knows best what should happen in those spaces. And yeah, we will be very surprised over time, like what are the findings from those participations. I think that that's where the key plays, because what works in one street doesn't necessarily work on another. So that's where it becomes very tricky, because implementing something in one street doesn't necessarily work on the other. And that's where we have to be cautious that before implementing something, we should actually do a public participation process of different scenarios of how this should be designed, and then based on that make a decision.
Yeah, so that even if you're moving in very strongly with a public, let's say, priority, you can still involve the public. Please, Sylvia.
Yeah, well, I would like to, of course, there are different needs in different neighborhoods. No, there are neighborhoods without parking places underground, for instance. But we really need to think about future. Teenagers, young people aren't thinking anymore about owning a car. They are thinking about using a car. And not only them, but I think in our age, people from 40, 50s, in Barcelona at least, I mean, people that live in cities. Of course, if you live in a rural area, you will need a car, and a car is a great invention. But you can always rent it, you can always share it. And that's what people are really starting to do now in big cities, I guess. And because we don't need a car that is parked 90% of the time or more, then we are paying for it for many. I mean, owning a car is just like 3,000 euros per year just without not moving it. No, it's so. This is really what I like from the new generations, is that they don't have this old cultural background that we all have here, no, like from the 60s, 70s, 80s. No, owning a car was a need for each family, because it made you free, it made you happy and beautiful. No, so it's just you can. I mean, I'm not owning a car since the last 2 years. I did until 2 years ago, and I'm just renting a car when I need it, and I feel much more free than when I had a car for myself. And I think this is really the change. We are not going against cars. We are just going against the bad use of the car in cities, where you've got many alternatives that are better for everyone. That's it.
The same for me. I don't own a car neither, and I agree with you. I think that providing micro-mobility solutions or hubs where they can actually find where there's the car sharing point, or maybe a scooter point, electric scooter or electric bike. Those are things that can be also provided as a scenario, as a micro-mobility solution for the citizens in those specific streets or areas. And that's also part of the different scenarios that a digital tool can provide, in order to know, okay, where would they like this solution or alternative to cars to be situated, because that's very important to know where this micro mobility hubs be located, in order for not receive any opposition, and also to solve the problem, which is, okay, how can I replace my car? Because that's another thing. I own an electric bike, so as well, like for me, it's amazing to move through Amsterdam with the bike. I think that having a car now has become more of an expense than anything else.
I also changed my old car for an e-bike, and I feel much more free and happy now. Yes.
And maybe I can just add to this, because I think it's a fascinating discussion, and totally agree with both Sylvia and Sam. We somehow have to make the people try it out. I think that's crucial. So we said before, how does it feel? And I think this feeling, this trying out, is really a game changer. So making people use e-bikes, maybe cargo bikes. Also the tool as a first step here to make them picture how the neighborhood could look like. I think that's already a great first step. But then we should somehow put something on the street, no matter if it's a parklet or if it's an e-bike or if it's an e-scooter, it doesn't matter. But if people try it out, maybe for a little time, they might really change their behavior. and then be more willing to replace their car with maybe sharing options.
Yeah, so creating that will also for change in people and allowing them to experiment something different. In that, I'd just like to hear also from a previous speaker on the mobility talks, Tuto Tai from Mobility Data.
If we want to give back the public space to the people, to the public, then going from A to B should become less of a hurdle. And then here you are. The digital world will actually help you organize better, or actually help you reappropriate the public space.
So she was actually in a mobility talks linked to intermodality. But I think the point is interesting because we're talking about creating livable, more humane spaces, inclusive and accessible. And at the same time, we have the argument that digital tools can help make that happen. And yet digital tools are somehow, still disconnected from, real bodily humane experiences. So I just actually wanted to get your perspective on this, the role and the importance of data, because we know that we're generating more and more and more data, and every individual becomes a data point on his little journey inside this 15-minute city, And I just want to see, what's your view on that? I mean, do you see that as definitely one of the major pillars of bringing about change in cities to really have access and use data, or do you still see some problems with that? Sylvia, maybe first.
Well, data is really, really, really important to. I mean, it's not the decision-making, central issue, but it's really helping you to go in the good direction. For instance, in the metropolitan area of Barcelona, not in the city, but in the metropolitan area, we know that 93% of the trips are up to 10 kilometers. So this means this is a cyclable distance in the 36 metropolitan municipalities. So we know we've got a huge potential if we create these bike lanes connecting all these municipalities, So data can really help us in going the good direction and show to the citizens that we do this because it's something that can really make the change.
Okay. Samuel.
I agree. I think that for me, it's always been of how can we make the whole process democratic, that people can actually participate and have a saying. I think that that's really the crucial point here, that everybody gets to say what they think and how should their streets should be redesigned. I think that's the fundamental issue right now. That there's not enough data to know what should be done in any area, and also in order to scale it to more areas. I think that's the key, and that's where I think that digital tools, not necessarily just ours, but are going to play a big part in order to collect this data and do data analytics that allows you to make understand better, make more informed decisions. Yeah.
And Benjamin.
Yeah, data is crucial for us as planners to make the right decision. So yes, I agree. Data is needed in order to build an accessibility tool, for instance. However, we have to be careful because at the end it's about how we also communicate these results. Not just to an academic crowd, but also to decision makers, and at the end also to citizens. Inform them about options, what they could do. I think that's crucial, and sometimes we tend to make it way too complicated and create huge tools that are black boxes where people are even a bit scared of. So simplifying it, explaining it also to citizens, maybe also to elderly or to kids, I think helps. And they will then help us to make our tools much more useful for everyone.
Okay, so as we're coming to an end, I'd like to also ask the audience, well, what do they think? What is the best way to go about redesigning public space? Should we be creating real-life temporary experiments that can morph over time, directly reclaim vehicle space to develop other uses, develop cities that are more attractive, or optimize the use of digital tools? So you can get voting on this poll. And I will now go back for a last round with our panelists. I saw that Benjamin, in 15 minutes time, I think you said that in Google says that you can write poetry. Correct? That's one of the options. So I'm going to ask you to write a bit of poetry. I want you to give me almost like a poem, a 30-second poem, on what would be your ideal utopian outcome for a 15-minute city. So it's poetry time. Who will be our first poet? Shall we start with Samuel?
Oh, that's I think it's accessibility. I think that's the key. How accessible and how do citizens reclaim the streets, reclaim the cities? I think it is all revolving around that. The pandemic just showed us that's people are starting to ask themselves, okay, now that I can work remotely, I can work from home, I want to spend more time outside. There's a lot of things that cities are, everything is changing so quickly for the better. And I believe that's the key. How can we make the quality of life better for the citizens? That's the main aspect. That would be the ideal utopia for me. That everything's accessible, easy, user friendly, and that people are happy. I think that their happiness reflects also on the city itself.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Samuel, for having shared your insights. Let's go over to Sylvia.
Well, I think the main issue is about creating caring cities, cities that are really taking care of everyone, of the needs of all the vulnerable. That Benjamin said, that 15% of people has some disability, and all of us in some part of our lives will have some disabilities. So we need our politicians and our technicians to take care of us, and of course not only of the citizens but of the planet, because it's only one, and we know we are in climate emergency, and we need to really go fast. So let's go back to the medieval cities, but then with the facilities of nowadays, and of course accessibility and caring cities.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for having shared the insights from Barcelona. And Benjamin.
Yeah, for me, the plus minus 15-minute city, which would be ideal, is stressing accessibility by proximity. And this should be done for all. So for all kind of people, no matter if they're old, young, if they're poor or rich. I think also affordability is a point that needs to be stressed. And affordability is not just if I can afford taking an e-scooter, but if I can afford living in an urban core where we have all these amenities around us. So if you go further out where it's cheaper to live, maybe there we are really lacking those 15-minute activities close by. So I think this is something that we really have to stress and work on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Benjamin, and to the three of you for having shared these insights with our audience. Greatly appreciated. And let's have a look then at what the audience was saying. What is the best way to go about redesigning public space? And it's, they're mostly convinced by the idea of creating these real-life temporary experiments that get things moving. Okay, so maybe that's a way forwards from this mobility talks. So I am now joined by Julienne Chen. She is Citizen Engagement and Program Manager at the EIT Urban Mobility. And Julienne, you'll be giving us some concluding remarks on this talk. Did it inspire you?
It absolutely inspired me. It was a really fascinating conversation. And I think, this is a topic that I love. And frankly, I could listen to you all talk about for much longer. So thank you very much for this really insightful conversation. So I now have the difficult task of trying to summarize a 50-minute discussion on the 15-minute city into a 5-minute conclusion. So I'll try to do my best, and I apologize in advance if I talk a little quickly. I know that you all want to get on with the rest of your day. But for me, one of my takeaways really is about positioning the concept of the 15-minute city into something much bigger. And I might also take it a little bit further and touch upon something that Benjamin said at the very end, which is, if 50% of the global population now lives in cities, that also conversely means that 50% of the global population doesn't live in cities. So do we now also need to think about the 15-minute suburb or even the 15-minute exurb? And if so, what does that mean for policy? What does that mean for planning? And of course, most importantly, what does that mean for people? I think within many cities, there's already a well-established ability to have the density, the public transportation connections, the infrastructure that at least serve as the foundation for a 15-minute city. But as we start to leave these conventional city boundaries, I don't think we can take that for granted anymore. The needs and expectations are different, the landscape is different, the environment is different. And whenever change is required, it becomes so important and really critical to understand that local context and how to adapt with that as a starting point. And I think a lot of us have seen, and we've touched upon it here today as well, how if a project doesn't have public support, it can stall for years, it can be canceled altogether, or it gets implemented and then no one uses it. And given the current climate crisis that we're in, unfortunately, we really don't have years and years to be waiting and doing things over. So that's where the citizen engagement component comes in. And I was really thrilled to see it touched upon so deeply in this conversation. The need to support human-centered cities as part of the sustainability transition means that we need to engage with people more deeply. And we need to do that in ways that don't shy away from the complexity, but really acknowledge that the complexity is part of the process. I also wanted to mention, the way that we think about citizen engagement at EIT Urban Mobility is not only about how do we involve citizens in broader planning discussions and in co-creating the built environment, but also to ensure that new mobility solutions, such as the ones that we support, are easy to understand and easy to access by all segments of the population. So will people who are less digitally literate know how to plan a multimodal trip chain using mobility as a service? Will they be able to afford an electric bicycle? If we create a subsidy program for electric bicycles, will it reach the right people? And do they even know how to ride a bicycle in traffic to begin with? So there's quite a lot of levers that are essential here and that we've talked about, from building capacity to do meaningful citizen engagement, both from the top down, but also from the bottom up, through to developing new tools that can help people to visualize and co-create new urban futures that were never possible before. And for me, this last point is really important because what we're talking about is reshaping mobility patterns and behaviors, and that's going to have a huge impact on the built environment. And I think as humans, we're all naturally a little bit skeptical of what we don't know. So I'm really excited about these new software and technologies like Model Me 3D, like augmented reality that can overlay new proposals on top of the existing environment, around even AI-generated technology renderings of different scenarios that can be co-created with people. And like Sylvia said, right, that can help to visualize what a different future can look like and to, most importantly, to generate informed discussion about it. So that's kind of my concluding remarks, but I also wanted to take a chance to share some of the projects and resources that we have at EIT Urban Mobility that might be interesting for some of you. So we do have several online courses on the topic of planning a more user-centric city around street experiments and around communicative planning. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at those. Tonight, actually, we're kicking off a new training program for 10 women across the EU to develop and initiate their own urban bicycling training sessions for other women in their community. And this year, we're also co-funding several citizen engagement and public realm projects. There's both technical ones that are testing out digital twins and mobile apps for citizen engagement, but also very human ones, like our Bicycle Heroes project that's working with children in 3 cities to generate and implement ideas for children-friendly mobility. So if you're interested to learn more, I would love to invite you to join our session at EIT Urban Mobility's flagship World Congress called Tomorrow Mobility, where we'll be sharing these projects and, of course, many, many others. Tomorrow Mobility is going to be held in Barcelona this year from the 15th to the 17th of November. So that's it for me. I would like to give a huge thanks to the speakers for your insightful contributions, to the audience for being here and for engaging with the topic, to Jean-Paul for your excellent facilitation as always, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next Mobility Talks or at the World Congress.